The Council of Galactica had never made a significant focus on Earth before. On them, humans were a little species, inconsequential on the large scale of the universe. Yet everything was altered when scouts from the Council reported concerning indications of the erratic nature of Earth's tiny, chaotic world, devoid of any feeling of galactic order. But in some ways, residents prospered from war and innovation. In proportion to the volatility, they made a quick decision and came to a conclusion. Posed a danger to the delicate equilibrium of the galaxy, didn't make that choice. Considered casually, after all, eradicating an entire world was anything but ordinary. But not all progress was equal to the GTA. The Council of Galactics had felt compelled to use one on fleet of their most powerful armies. It is so huge and technologically sophisticated that it claimed to have taken over worlds without breaking Earth's genesis. The initial indications of the imminent assault manifested as enigmatic celestial lights. Satellites began to vanish, overnight blotting of entire constellations out as extraterrestrial ships approached. Panic circulated swiftly. Newscasters rushed to decipher jumbled alerts from intercepted extraterrestrial communications, while emergency summits were held by international leaders. The defense forces of Earth were called into action. However, humanity realized in its heart that it was exceeded what Earth might accomplish in the face of a galactic army's weaponry regardless. How far along were they by human standards? Nothing in contrast to what the Council possessed. Available laser arrays that were able to destroy whole cities' shields, immune to troops and nuclear attacks. Designed for battle, it wasn't suitable. The prospect of humanity's defeat. It depended on how rapidly, in the midst of this pandemonium, in a quiet spot worldwide, there was a struggling crew keeping our world at a fraction of its brand full a result. Brilliance or covert military experience, merely a person who spent their nights hearing other people's woes over drinks they were unaware of from aliens and military forces or galactic. To be honest, councils didn't give a damn about their Dinandaru. World was the tavern they operated in a tiny town, where the most significant issues were unpaid tabs and the odd altercation. But when the rumor of the alien landing changed to, in actuality, not even tiny communities were exempt. The bar was overrun by panicked patrons. Their faces are white with terror at night. Someone murmured the word as it approached. The bartender is spreading like wildfire. Stood behind the counter. Observing the horror they encountered, the hitherto unmolested Wyback horrors passed by. The air was chaotic as the crowd descended, tense with fear as they discussed hiding spots and evacuations. The bartender took action. Strange that they didn't panic or flee. They made their way to the rear chamber and came out, cradling a battered ancient baseball bat. Wasn't a unique bat. Bat wasn't filled with extraterrestrial metals or magical abilities, merely a scuffed wooden bat from years of backyard. They said their voice, game's enough, breaking through the cacophony. The crowd fell silent, and everyone's gaze shifted to the peacekeeper. If they're coming, bartender, we have. There are two options, give them or sit here and cry. A struggle to recall the words that hovered in the air briefly before giggling broke out. This was undoubtedly a farce. A baseball bat versus an extraterrestrial army was ridiculous, but something about the bartender's cool delivery of it. It wasn't a joke. It was steady, almost rebellious. The bartender's reasoning made sense to them. Why not leave if humanity was doomed anyhow? It wasn't about winning when we went out swinging. It was intended to make a statement, and perhaps merely obscured by the Galactic Council may have undervalued the spirit of humanity. While the leaders of the world organized the grand methods and scientists' efforts diligently in subterranean laboratories, the bartender's choice was far less complex, lacking in tactics and technology. Simply uncooked resolve. They weren't attempting to aim for anything. They did not consider themselves heroes. For them, it was about defending their house, their neighborhood, and those they were concerned about. Back in the day. Went by as the extraterrestrial fleet approached. Eventually, the bartender turned into local legends about their audacious quorums. The town then heard the declaration. Some people in the area wrote it off as madness. However, Some were motivated by the offer from OSS Clancy McAdams. Here, the simplicity was someone who wasn't terrified and paralyzed. Someone who refused to go in silence. When reporters showed up and inquired as to why they'd made such an absurd choice, that the bartender shrugged and said, "Someone has to do," they stated that, "I might as well be." The response was greeted with confusion, but the terror that struck a chord was universal. But it was the Galactic Army's defiance by the time its fleet arrived in the atmosphere of Earth. The bartender was prepared, but they lacked a plan, didn't anticipate winning, but they persisted. Baseball bat in hand outside the pub, gazing toward the heavens as the first extraterrestrial. In preparation for the Galactic Council, ships descended. It was only another victory for the Galactic. The extraterrestrial was personal to the bartender. The fleet arrived with strength and accuracy. That made it obvious they were an unstoppable power, gracefully dropping 1 out of 4 invaders in 7 minutes, throwing omen over cities on Earth like. Every vessel seems to have more grim omens, more sophisticated than anything that humanity had ever dreamed of. The Council of the Galaxy has dispatched its most elite forces. Despite being unarmed, the Council of the Sigma readied themselves. There wouldn't be much opposition if there was any. The troops on Earth hurried too. Tanks were deployed, and fighter jets responded. Rolled into cities and troops were ready. Battle command centers were humming with live stream reports from sources all over the world, including pictures of extraterrestrial vessels and intercepted indications humanity was resolved to remain its foundation, despite the fact that the chances were in opposition to it. The aliens announced their arrival. Their technique produced Earth's defenses are nearly absurd in the exercise. They quickly neutralized the rocket. Fleets were disarmed by systems. Cities turned dark, rendering tanks ineffective. Moment their power networks were taken over, it was confusing millions of people. A display of power intended to destroy human souls prior to a single shot being fired. But the altercation continued. The initial encounters were tumultuous. Despite being outmatched, human forces refused to dispatch hundreds of copies of the variants. Pilots flew their jets to surrender, straight into alien shields in the hopes of cause soldiers to shoot at the aliens, with towering mechas and bullets bouncing off advanced armor without causing any harm. Civilians were also caught up. Some people are hiding in fear amid the turmoil. Others became members of improvised militias to keep the aliens out of their houses, for there were legends. They proceeded methodically, much like a well-oiled machine, automating their each motion with accuracy, and determined that they had defeated innumerable Erectorpisters. It was not any different from earlier worlds. Their forces, in their opinion, advanced with steadfast faith in their weaponry, far more than what anyone could understand that Earth was a primitive planet, a world where opposition was nothing more than compared to a minor discomfort in the middle of this war in progress. The bartender made their move, whereas everyone else was locked in futility or immobilized by terror battles. They were on the outskirts of the battleground, that is, supplied with only a pessary. Seeing a single baseball bat in hand, when humans encountered an alien invasion, it was such ridiculous that it briefly stopped the Galactic Army. Is advanced by aliens. The commanders watched the individual from their warships, perplexed by this display. Wasn't a well-prepared person's defiance army or an organized group's desperation. This was something completely different. Militia. Distinct from a single person, equipped with nothing except willpower and a bit of timber. It was nearly absurd, but it stimulated their interest in Ios for the first time. Alien soldiers warily walked up. Their sophisticated scanners that examined the gnome concealed firearms were discovered by the bartender. No sophisticated technology, nothing that presented a risk, but something on how the people stood, quietly, unflinching and unwavering, as though they did not consider the aliens to be invincible enemies, but as something that might contest it, but nothing came of it. It was almost unbelievable how the bartender swung so precisely on their back that it captured the closest alien soldier. The guard clatters their weapon at the ground. The action unfolded like a strange spoof of war. A person with a baseball but successfully disarming a soldier from the most cutting-edge military technique. The incident shocked the galaxy, waves for the invaders on both sides. It was an instance of misunderstanding that their superiority was undeniable, but here was a person who had changed the course of one interaction. With only unprocessed resolve for the people, it was a glimmer of optimism and a reminder that the bartender's behavior wasn't about the bartender's behavior. Kirsten encouraged people to take action. Throughout, the people on the battlefield started to join the resistance by employing all available means. Kitchen knives were found as weapons. Building equipment, even domestic appliances turned into representations of defiance. Winning wasn't the goal, about not letting go without a fight as the conflict continued to rage on. The bartender persisted in defying anticipations. Every B-stroke was a declaration stating that humanity weren't prepared to stop moving, were unconventional in their approach. Non-existent, but the aliens were able to use two foreseeable strategies and organized opposition discovered. Having trouble adjusting to the news, quickly bartenders take advantage of what, for all they know, they could be living in the future. A practical joke Medea disapproves of started as a single act of rebellion and evolved into become a call to action for individuals throughout the world. The entire world watched the video. Their astonishment gradually replaces their fear. If one individual could confront the Zellans, perhaps humanity had a galactic army. Chance in the meantime, after all the aliens started to reconsider their strategy, this wasn't their simple conquest. Expected their men to have received training for major conflicts rather than for handling with an adversary who was wild and unpredictable. Initially, during the campaign, they encountered a task for which they were unprepared. As seen by the Galactic Council, from afar was shocked by what they were. Observing their army's instability in each, the prior campaign was halted by one person and an increasing number of resistance. It was humiliating. It was enough discoloration on their repute. Yet they were unable to ignore the reality that is being revealed to them in spite of it. The likelihood of the bartender's actions changed the Galactic Army's momentum. Unstoppable first discovered themselves on the limited. They had underestimated the defensive, the soul of humanity, and now they were. The cost of the conflict was far from over, but it seemed for the first time that Earth had a chance to win. The first act of disobedience by the bartender sent oscillations inside the Galactic Army's ranks. It wasn't merely a physical assault, it was one of their men. The psychological trauma of encountering an experience so deeply traumatic that it says literally no one wants to undergo it again. It swept through the crew. It opened refuge for others who also could feel it. Adversary they were unable to forecast. The ops minister. Every move the bartender made seemed to defy reasoning when the Galactic Army was in action. On tactics and accuracy, the barman's method was straightforward. Improvisation is the initial conflict. Among the aliens, and the bartender had dismissed as a luke, but as similar interactions transpired, it turned into encounters. Evidently, the bartender's luck wasn't application of a baseball bat. A remnant of a prehistoric sports were confusing and horrifying, that they didn't engage in a soldier, following the rules and maintaining discipline. They battled as if they had nothing. To prove foreign and to lose everything, troops, tall and dressed in unbreakable armor, discovered themselves, outwitted in the most surprising. The swings of the bartender weren't only because they were exact and strong. Disarming weaponry to target weak points, disassembling control panels, and even communication systems were disabled, as if the weapon's simplicity rendered the aliens' ability to cutting-edge technology to combat the Galactic Army as used to defeating their adversaries with overwhelming power oneself, up against a new form of conflict. The bartender had no intention of winning, not in the conventional sense, trying to eliminate the adversary or conquer a region. Their objective was considerably easier to achieve disorder and caused the extraterrestrials to doubt their visions. That led to the barman actions even more successful was how infectious their disobedience grew close. Inspired by their boldness, humans started to participate. They lacked access to military-grade or advanced weapons apparatus, but they had ingenuity transformed commonplace items into tools. Of fire extinguishers and resistant crowbars, and even the use of culinary tools with unexpected benefit. However, the aliens are effective. Superior technology was unprepared. For such unorthodox strategies, their training placed a strong emphasis on strategy and cooperation. But this disorganized opposition hampered their plans at every stage. The bartender in the lead turned into an emblem of humanity's resistance to quiet. In the meantime, the bartender's behavior didn't only motivate people, it made the aliens uncomfortable for the first time. People created sculptures that represented themselves, and they suffered from an insatiable throng of sculptures sent to watch because they knew they couldn't see them. Fractures started to show up in their paralysis. Otherwise, unwavering confidence. Field reports detailed their less hesitation in the movements of soldiers, exact disintegration of their structures. It was unfamiliar for the Galactic Army to be contested, let alone by someone so erratic, which the bartender was ignorant about. The complete magnitude of their influence remained relentless in their crusade. Every alien they encountered was resolute, a reminder of the dangers. They didn't consider themselves heroes, but someone who was unable to wait while there was an invasion of their world. Each swing they made conveyed a message. Earth wouldn't disappear in silence as the resistance increased. So did the myth of the film of their altercation captured by the bartender, disseminated via social media, transforming them becoming an improbable hero who inspired people all over the world. The world started rallying around their tale. It was more than just the battle. Regarding defiance and the reluctance to accept a force that seems unstoppable for the last 100 years, this change in spirit within the Galactic Army was a catastrophe. They had expected a simple conquest, a speedy and definitive triumph. Rather, they were bogged down in a battle they were unable to recognize, that their soldiers were taught to. Organized armies were unable to against a foe who engaged in combat with ingenuity and galactic chaos council observing from a distance. Powerful chairs increased in number, irritated their cherished army. The height of their military power was stumbling, and in the middle of everything was a lone person holding a wooden bat. They were unable to endure the humiliation. Disregard the bartender's behavior as well started to have an impact that extended beyond news from Earth. Throughout the galaxy, about the resistance extended to other worlds for a long time. Suppressed by the Council of Galactic Authorities, started to pay attention to Earth a little. Chaotic planet could rise. To the Council, they might be able to. The bartender returned to the battlefield, encountered progressively challenging difficulties. The aliens are having adjusting to their strategies. Used specialist units created to combat non-traditional resistance. These new units were quicker, more powerful and adaptable in terms of strategy. However, the bartender steadfastly refused to back down with every conflict, becoming more difficult. The bartenders were more desperate and intense. Bat, formerly a sign of rebellion, became to provide indications of where they were, but they persisted. Discovering fresh methods to outsmart their opponents, it was more than just brute force for Saku. It concerned the timing of the strategy and a surprise aspect for the bartender. Additionally, initiatives had a significant impact on the totality of humanity. Opposition where there had previously been, there was finally optimism after fear and dispersal. Neighborhoods that had been rendered immobile by the Dominator's invasion mustered the strength to resist. The bartender's behavior demonstrated that, despite the tremendous odds, it was conceivable to win. Since the army had trouble regaining control of the legend of the bartenders, developed into the person they were considered heroes by the extraterrestrials. History of a force that disobeyed justification for the Galactic Council, desperate to keep their power, started considering the bartender to be a serious danger to the bartender, but stayed they weren't concentrating on the battle. Eager for recognition or fame, their main objective was to keep their house safe, their neighborhood, and the individuals they cared for, and as a result, they became a representation of all that humanity stood for: fortitude, inventiveness, and an unwavering spirit. Eldred's fractured spirit and its unclear edges, the work of the aliens for everyone. Their cutting-edge technology and tactical planning discovered themselves on the Horde. They had underestimated the defensive, mankind, and they were now compensating. They used their warning bat to price the Bartender. Her unwavering resolve had transformed. The resistance started as the war's tide turned, to develop, gaining power from the increasing disobedience to the Galactic Authority. What sparked a series of isolated acts of uprising turned into a concerted endeavor. The unconventional method used by the Bartender became a model for motivating others. Innovative and practical strategies, military, citizens, and everyone else who wants to battle embrace this newly discovered improvisation. It's transforming the battlefield into a disorganized yet resolute stance in opposition to the human ingenuity was evident in the invaders as individuals started repurposing on a daily basis stuff into the instruments of equipment for resistance construction. Agricultural implements and even antiquated electronics were changed to improvised weapons without the use of cutting-edge technology the defenders of Earth depended on. However, the Galactic Army's flexibility, better in terms of organization and firepower, found it difficult to keep up with the unpredictable nature of these strategies. Each threatened to ring the drill in surpassing the effort. At the core of this struggle are invaders. Was a renewed sense of human unity. The fear and worry at first gave way to a group determination. Individuals who had previously been split along political, geographic, and culture now discovered a shared understanding in their shared hardship. They weren't merely famishing, they were fighting for their lives to demonstrate that Earth would not submit to anyone, regardless of how strong they were, to the divine will to wash away their sins. What did you find? His Bartender movement were thrown into an unexpected part, even if they didn't look for it. Beset by fear, and fear of failure and consequence, even the strong and quick-witted would find themselves being filled with fear when confronted with their weakness. Leadership, their tenacity made them an ideal representation of the resistance. They were consulted for advice, motivated by their bravery. With fortitude, the barmen in turn accepting this responsibility, not with fancy speeches or ideas, but with the same silent determination that had outlined what they were doing from the Galactic Army to acknowledge the Meekens. Their approach changed as the threat grew. They sent out more sophisticated units and changed their strategies in an effort to stop the opposition before it could acquire more traction. Although their attempts were confronted by a fierce resistance, humanity's determination only appeared to get stronger in response to. In these questions, the journey of the Bartender arrived at a crucial turning point. When they encountered a galactic struggle, the armies, this was no typical soldier, warlords. However, a senior commander was afraid throughout the galaxy for their brutality and dexterity. The conflict was unavoidable. Conflict between two forces that had come to represent the greater struggle. The warlord was sure of their superiority, anticipated a simple victory, considering that they had the most the galaxy's sophisticated weapons had to offer. But the Bartender refused to back down. Vim directly, it wasn't power or technology that dictated the result. It was just plain grit and inventiveness. The Bartender's capacity to consider their success in adapting to the heat of conflict turned out to be the warlords reversing the warlord's defeat dispatch. The Galactic Army was shaken by happy blues initially. They encountered not merely bodily losses, but a decline in spirits their troops were previously so sure of. Their unbeatability started to be questioned. The Bartender's actions had a mission: change the tide, altering the equilibrium of authority that few people might possess expected when the opposition increased. The Galactic Army gained momentum, becoming more defensive. Their soldiers were dispersed throughout. Several fronts were difficult to maintain, regulate what had begun as a habit. Conquest has turned into a maze. Battle that they were unable to win with ease, the Galactic Council observing from a distance, increased. They had underestimated how desperate they were. From the beginning, humanity disregarded Earth. As an archaic backwater, they now had to deal with the very real possibility of failure. They only had the 7 colonies to rest secure from any invasion. After a failure for a proud council itself under control and command, this was an unimaginable situation. In spite of the increasing strain, the bartender continued to concentrate on the duty for which they weren't engaged in combat. Glory or acknowledgement, their sole worry was the security of their planet and its inhabitants. This unwavering resolve turned into the foundation of the resistive reminder of the cause for which they fought. The conflict's last phases were characterized by a string of resounding wins for the resistance in every conflict. Know of how little chiseled away at the galaxy. The strongest bartender in the army, resourceful, kept setting an example, demonstrating repeatedly that tenacity could triumph over even the most overwhelming odds. Ultimately, the Earth-based Galactic Army units started to fail at the cutting-edge technologies once their most valuable resource turned into a liability, which the Resistance had discovered take advantage of its flaws, turning the resistors against them. It was evidence of humanity's tenacity and reminder from ingenuity that no force, regardless of how strong and unfailing the bartender's contribution to these triumphs, couldn't be claimed, that their behavior had changed a situation that seems hopeless into a mobilizing cry for humanity, which started as one act of rebellion had developed into a movement that was global in scope. The Galactic Army was once so sure of their dominance, now had to deal with the truth of their fail as the last battles took place. As it turned out, the Galactic Army had not only undervalued Earth's capacities, but the essence of humanity, reluctance to give up its capacity to adaptation and persistence, had been its. The bartender's greatest strength, their battered baseball bat and steadfast resolution, had come to represent that spirit. The Galactic Army ultimately possessed, forced to withdraw their once powerful forces. Now, powerful forces have beaten and discouraged departed from Earth, leaving a bitter taste in their mouths. The battle altered the Earth forever. It was a difficult battle for humanity, and nevertheless, the bartender's decision praised as a hero who failed to recognize themselves. Consequently, they went back to their bar, and Bat is now a representation of everything they own. For them, the battle wasn't about obstacles. It was about standing up to win a battle, regardless of the odds, for what mattered.